Hi everyone, it's your book coach Lisa Kovala here. Grab a cup of coffee and settle in for a discussion about all things writerly. I'm the author of Sister's Winter War and Surviving Studhof, my father's memories behind the death cave, and I'm an author accelerator, certified fiction, and memoir book coach. As a Finnish Canadian, I also love my coffee. In this podcast, we'll take a coffee break together to chat with authors, publishers, book coaches, marketers, agents, publicists, booksellers, and many others. Welcome to Women Writing. So happy you could join us for a coffee and a chat. Today in Women Writing, we're chatting with young adult author Emily De Angelis. Hi, Emily.
Hello.
How are you?
I am just fabulous. And how are you?
I'm really great. And thanks for coming to have a coffee break with us today. I don't know if you're going to recognize this. Remember this?
Oh, your blueberry cup.
This
Yes,
is my
I
blueberry
do.
cup.
I do remember it. I gave you that as a thank you for interviewing me at my launch way back in May now.
It's already
Oh
May. Oh
God,
my
the
gosh.
time has flown.
Your book baby is going to be a year in
I know.
2025.
I know it is.
Tell
That's
us about this lovely YA novel that you wrote.
it is at its very core, it is a book about the loss and rediscovery of artistic identity. Probably also rediscovering some family relationships that sort of fell by the wayside without the characters understanding why.
Mm.
And hopefully the book does explain that. So it's about a 15-year-old Nori Lynch who has a very distant relationship with her mother. She has a very rocky relationship with her father, but the one person she does love in life is her grandmother.
Mm.
And before her grandmother passes away, she gives Nori this wooden antique artist box because it's her grandmother is the one person in her life that understands what art means to Nori.
Right.
Her father, on the other hand, does not understand that. I had one young reviewer say that Nori's father was a giant turd, which he
Accurate.
was. It was accurate. And he's always looking he's got big dreams, but not a lot of follow through. And he's always looking to make a buck. And so he discovers that Nori's grandmother had given her this antique box and he thinks it's worth a lot of money. And he hatches a plan to sell it out from under Nori.
Mm.
And he does it on during a horrible early spring, late winter storm. And they get into car accident. Her father's killed and the car catches fire, but she and her mother survive, but the artist box burns in the fire. So Nori turns away from her art exactly at the moment she should be turning toward it because
Yeah.
she's in this moment of trauma. And so the story just follows her coming to understand this
Mm.
and also understanding why her mother is the way she is. And it's a contemporary story, but it has this thread of magical spiritualism that goes through it. And it's based on Celtic spiritualism. So when they end up on Manitoulin Island because those are the people that welcome them are the only people that Nori has left and she can't take care of her mother on her own. So they go to this place on Manitoulin Island called Burren Bay, and there she encounters the spirit of a centuries old ghost, and that spirit becomes her spirit guide, and it's through that spirit that she both rediscovers her artistic self and also reconnects with her mother.
Right.
So
Lovely.
that's the short
That
version.
it right. And set on Manitoulin Island, both of you are very familiar with Manitoulin Island. What
Yes.
inspired you to use that location?
I love the island. And I've even before, even I've been going there since I was a kid. And then more so once I was in a family of my own, we would go camping and then we got a trailer and then eventually we bought property. So I've been going there every summer for a very long time. And there's something about Manitoulin Island when you go across the swing bridge, it's one of the few remaining swing bridges. And when you go across the swing bridge, you kind of feel a change in yourself.
You
It's a
do.
deeply spiritual place. It's a deeply beautiful place physically.
Mhm.
And it just seemed like the right place for this story, and especially this story with a lot of spiritualism in it.
Absolutely. I know what you mean by going across that bridge. It's just
Yeah.
there's some moment that happens and then you cross you cross over. It sounds ominous, but it's not. It's beautiful and it's just the landscape is fantastic and it's such a varied place and has so much history. I don't know if people are familiar with Manitoulin Island, but definitely a place. Oh, I mean, Diane and I were just talking about it in a previous
Right.
episode because we did a retreat there, which you were at, by the way. Oh, yes, that was very fun.
Yeah, and
But
it's steeped in indigenous spirituality as
yes,
well. And I was, while there's a component of that in the Stones of Burren Bay, I was very cognizant of not wanting to appropriate that. And
right.
my own family history, at least portion of my family history, is my on my paternal side. Our family came from Ireland in 1831. So I was kind of getting into that, exploring the Irish component to my own personal background. And I
Absolutely.
felt like I had I was more, that was much more closely connected to who I am as a person and how I was raised. So
Right.
that's way into the story.
Yeah, I love that. Um, and so Burn Bay is not an actual place on Manitoulin. Is it based on a particular spot that you're
It's
particularly?
it's based on many little villages and bays on the lighthouse, on the island, plus lighthouses. There's a lighthouse at Burn Bay. Specifically, the lighthouse I had in mind was the lighthouse, the Mississauga Strait Lighthouse, which is actually sadly no longer accessible to us
Oh,
humans
oh,
because it's on you have to access it through Lafarge's land, and it's just not safe to do so at
right.
this point.
Hmm.
That was largely the what I had in my head in terms of the physicality, what it looked like. But really, there something like 11 lighthouses or light standards on the island or around the island, on islands
Yeah.
outside the island. So they were all a little piece of them inspired the story. That Burren Bay, the actual connection to the Burren is a real place in Ireland called the Burren, which is in County Clare, Ireland, which is in the sort of southwestern part of Ireland. And that area and a lot of the shoreline of Manitoulin Island share a geographic or geological connection through this a special kind of sort of alvar pavement, or this formation of rock with grooves
Oh,
cut into them. Yeah, so there's that geological connection
oh, sorry.
behind the two
So
places.
I'm so sorry. I'm going to pause us. Oh,
Yeah, so the Burren in Ireland has much more of an actual physical connection with Manitoulin Island because of that shared geological formation. So I have not been. I would like to. We have friends recently, our acquaintances who have been there, and they talk about the Burren, and so maybe someday I'll get there.
yeah, absolutely. I had no idea that there was that connection
Yeah,
geologically. That's fascinating to me that there's that spiritual connection too, and the indigenous stories and Irish Celtic stories and all of those things I think have
right.
underlying connections. But yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah,
that's
and
it. We're
so
all connected.
yeah, and I was able to to exploit all that in a good way, in a good
In
way.
the best way possible. Emily, I know that you were working on this book for a little bit of time. Do
I,
you
I,
want to
I
talk
think
about
100 years,
100 years?
at least since
You
last
look good.
century. I do, at least since last century, because it kind of the first time I visited a lighthouse was probably somewhere around 1992-ish. And that's sort of where there was the teeniest little seed of a story. But I always say there's a difference between loving to write and wanting to write and knowing how to write. So I
Yes.
had to do a lot of learning, which I did. I took workshops, I did seminars, I went to retreats, I was eventually accepted into the Humber School for Writers, which was a year-long correspondence course where you're connected with a mentor. I did that. And it took me a long time to kind of understand the kind of story I wanted to tell.
Yeah.
And it was worth every moment because I think it got me to a place where it was the strongest story I could tell. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, during that time you were working, you were a teacher,
yes, yes, I
kids.
was
I
teaching.
mean,
Yeah,
you're busy. And I think that's really important for folks who are wanting to write to understand that, especially that first endeavor is, yes, it's a passion project, but it's also an opportunity to learn the craft.
yeah.
And it takes time and to
And I
develop that.
read a lot. I
Yeah.
read a lot. I was originally, when I got out of university, I was originally a children's young adult librarian.
Yes.
And that's where I really got introduced into because when I was growing up, we didn't have young adult literature the way there is now.
Hmm.
And definitely, I mean, it was in the 80s and 90s, but not when I was a kid. You know, we had Nancy Drew, Hardy Boy, Trixie Belden, you know, kind of
Yes.
like these very packed kind of stories. And then there was classical
Yeah.
literature like Anne of Green Gables and things like that that were considered children's or perhaps young adult, but not the same animal as it is today. So
True.
I that's when I first in the early 90s is when I first came to young adult literature and fell in love and completely fell in love. So there was a lot of reading going on
Right.
too through those years. Because you can't write what you don't read is,
Yeah, I love
I
that.
think I would say that. Yeah.
I agree. And I think young adult has become much better known now, and the quality is so amazing. Like it's, I think like you're right that early YA maybe was, um, I mean, it was fun for us as young kids reading them, but now when I've gone back and read something that I loved as a kid, and I don't recommend that necessarily
And you went,
because
mm.
you're like, oh, it's not so good. But at the time, of course, I loved it. But today's YA isn't really just for young adults.
No,
It's
it's not. One of my pet peeves is when people talk about YA as a genre,
mm,
and it's not. It's an audience, it's a market, but within that market or audience of young adult is all the other genres you see in fiction. So it is a pet peeve. Plus, um, there are a lot of adults. I read a market survey from I think it was from 2023, and it's a high percentage, like 55% of all YA is purchased
mm,
by adults. And of that 55%, well over 70% of those people intend to read it. They bought it for themselves. They
yeah,
didn't buy it to sneak read and then give it to
right.
somebody. They bought it for themselves. It's like I think we need another category. We
Yeah.
need another category of YA that appeals to the adult reader
Mm,
as well. Because I think there is a difference. There are YA books that are very specific to their YA audience. But I think books like Stones, plus a lot of other things I've read out there, have a lot I mean, there are whole podcasts devoted to YA that is
yeah.
read by adults.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if everyone can hear Emmy is in the background growling a little bit. She's usually very quiet, but when somebody walks by with a dog, she's gonna
I'm
growl.
not hearing her, so I don't hear her.
But when we go for a walk with her, you do think she even makes a peep? No, if she sees another
No,
dog, she's just
she's
little.
brave inside. She's very
That's
brave
right.
inside.
Very brave inside. No, I totally agree with you about the young adults, thinking about categories and thinking about, devising some new language around it because you're right. It's just being read by everyone because the quality is so high and the stories are so engaging.
Yes,
Yeah.
the
Uh,
stories are every bit as engaging as any even I would say even literary fiction.
mhm,
There is literary uh, literature for young adults that is
absolutely.
as engaging to adults as it is to young
Yeah.
adults.
Have you ever thought about why that is? Like, what is it about young adult stories that make us as adults
Yeah.
want to dive into them?
I've actually spent a good friend of ours, Vera Constantino, she's a poet and a writer. She and I have talked at length about why do adults like to read what everybody traditionally thinks is only written for teenagers or
Mm,
young adults. And I think it's the same reasons largely that bring you to any book, that there's something about the story that engages you. But
mm.
it's also sometimes for an adult, it's nostalgia. It brings you
Yeah,
back to those days, the one main time in your life where you're building yourself. And I
yeah.
think there's something that draws adults about that. I like to write YA that's very multi-generational.
Mm,
And so sometimes readers can see themselves in the adults around. I think it can be really kind of instructional in terms of how we interact with each other.
mm,
Um, and I think also YA, because it's told from the protagonist point of view, because there are specific things about YA,
mm.
and one of the main things is it's through the eyes of the young adult protagonist. And it's them who solve whatever problem they
Right.
have.
Hmm.
It's not an adult swooping in and solving. And I think that's empowering. I
It
think that's
is.
really empowering, not just to youth, but to adults, and maybe instructional to adults, because they
Hmm.
can sit back and go, oh, now maybe when I interact with the young adults in my life, I can keep this in mind that
Yeah,
they're as sophisticated, and there are no topics that are taboo in
that's
young
right.
adults.
Mm.
Many young adult writers and many parents would beg to differ, but really
Yeah,
there isn't. There
nothing's off
isn't.
limits. No, and as older, I would say I'm a slightly older adult now. um, we've all been young adults at some point. We can also connect to those characters at that time of life and access our memories of being that age and struggling with decisions and who are we in the world and how do we interact and what's our place and all of those kind of fundamental questions that we all have been through at some time and maybe many times throughout our life. So I feel like we can see ourselves in lots of different characters in young adult novels, and maybe that's what draws us to it as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Also, there are libraries now that interfile their YA books with the adult fiction,
Oh, I love
which I think
that.
is brilliant because you and I both know Halle
Yes.
Gadri,
Hmm.
who is with River Street Writes, who is the book publicist. She works with my publisher, Latitude 46. And she says, really, it's just a marker. When you say something is YA, it's a marker that the book is accessible to youth.
Yeah.
You
Right.
know, it's going to be about something that maybe they can relate to,
Mhm.
but it doesn't mean it's written down. It doesn't
No.
mean it's written less well. It's stellar work.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of, when you hear about libraries interfiling their work, I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I love that too. There goes Emmy having a little bark. I'm wondering if the bus is coming by, but it's a little too early for our buses, so maybe I'm wrong. Let me pause just for a second. Okay, so talking about YA, you are reaching a ton of different readers with Stones of Burren Bay, and I know, having known you for a long time, that you had an amazing strategy as a writer. Sometimes authors don't think about they think about their launch and they think about like, oh, maybe I'll do a couple social media posts, but they don't necessarily think about the business side of the book. And it is a responsibility as authors to not only write and get the best book out that we can, but also to help launch it into the world. And the publisher is partly responsible for that, but authors are too. So you had a great strategy, sort of moving into the launch and then continuing outside of the launch. What did you do to kind of think about preparing for getting this book into the world and into readers' hands?
I went to a few webinars. I contacted other authors who had been doing well and just sort of chatted with them. I really didn't have, well, I did, I suppose. It wasn't a hard, fast strategy. I'm going to do this and then this, because
Right.
it is still a learning curve.
Yes.
I largely don't feel that it's my job to sell books. In a really tangible, sitting and taking money sort of
You're
way.
not in your car sitting at the
No,
grocery store going, "Hey, have a book."
buy books. No, I don't do that. But it is my responsibility to promote me as the writer of the book.
Mm,
And so I knew I had a lead in of, maybe a month or two before the book launched, and then maybe 6 months after. And that might even be generous. But uh, to be honest, I'm going way beyond those
mm,
borders.
yeah.
I was in contact with a lot of really good authors who gave me ideas. I had what I called my promo
I
posse.
love that.
And it was people I could contact and say, okay, this month we're all going to go to our closest library and request the book. Those sorts of
Yeah.
things. Our closest, your favorite bookstore, and request the book, because those are the things that bring the book into the public eye. I knew I had to have a social media presence as the writer of the Stones of Burren Bay, but also as a writer.
Yes.
So I had to learn social media.
Hmm.
I had to I had to come to understand how I would use it. I hear a lot of writers who are afraid it's going to interfere with their writing, or they're going to have to spend too much time doing it. But it's really about learn how the social media platform works,
Hmm.
and then have 2 or 3 things you're going to do every week to promote yourself and what you're writing. And then I probably spend maximum an hour and a half a week
Mm,
to prepare my posts. But through that, I'm reading, I'm writing, I'm going to different workshops and things like that. So it's
yeah.
a multifaceted approach. But if all you worry about are book sales, you forget
Yeah.
about promoting yourself as a writer.
Yeah.
And you need to do that through I believe, through the most modern means we have.
Yeah.
And I have a website.
Hmm.
January, I have it on my goals list for January to start as a newsletter with Substack.
See you on Substack.
Yeah, well, it's going to be a learning curve because I've had to see, the best thing I ever did was give birth to a child who then grew up and became a journalist and a
Yes.
communications expert. That was the best
Agreed.
thing I did. You did the same
We
thing.
have the same background here.
And so she was able to train me on a bunch of things. And she's also taken over my website. But I want to try to do Substack myself.
Yeah.
So we shall see how far I get on my own.
Totally
But
doable.
whether we like it or not,
Yeah.
if we want to write and we want to be picked up by your same publisher again, or a new publisher, and you want your book to go far and wide, you have to be prepared to market yourself
Yeah.
as a writer.
Yeah.
And then the book kind of comes along. I submitted um, it's been having the publicist with Latitude has been phenomenal. They've
Yeah.
got all kinds of opportunities. And then I was looking at different festivals for young adult literature, found one. I knew it would be hard to get into the big ones because you have to have a bit more of a track record.
Hmm.
But I submitted the Latitude submitted a book for me on my behalf to a YA festival in Corpus Christi, Texas, and it was accepted. So
Yay. That's
in
exciting.
February, we're going on a road trip, and
Nice.
it's they don't all pay super well, but they pay a few things like your hotel rooms, and they pay your meals while you're there. So, they take care of you while you're there. So it's a way of just getting my book. I never thought it would get to Texas, but
And there
it's
you go.
to
And
Texas.
beyond. No,
Yeah.
I think what you've done beautifully on social media, because sometimes we think about social media as being, I don't know, not a nice place, but I think in my experience, it's been lovely. We're surrounded by readers and writers
Yep.
and the most generous people in the world, in my opinion. And the thing that I see you doing really beautifully is you're on social media and you're making connections with people. And that's the heart of it, right? Yes, there's a post, and yes, here's what I'm doing. And you want people to be aware of those things happening so that they might be able to come, or whatever we're trying to let people know about. But it's that conversation, it's that engagement with other people. And then it doesn't feel icky, it feels lovely. It feels like a
Yeah.
community.
And I
And
think
that's,
it behooves us to, um, as much as I post about what I'm doing, I have to be willing to follow what other writers are
yeah,
doing and comment or give a thumbs up. It doesn't have
yeah,
to take that long
yeah,
to engage, because there's nothing worse than doing all of this and then nobody kind of reaches out to you. It's a give and a take, and I
yeah.
think some people forget that.
Hmm.
And so it because
Agree.
they have a new book coming out, so they do the social media push, but they forget that in between books
Yeah,
are other people who are wanting to reach out to you. And
yeah.
it doesn't take a ton of time. And
No.
I don't put anything personal,
Hmm.
in the sense of, I keep my personal life
Yeah,
personal,
fair. Hmm.
other than, acknowledging birthdays and
Yes.
weddings and stuff like that. Um, and trying to not take, for me, I try not to take a major political point of view,
Right.
because I can appreciate that everybody, I have a big voice. I have to tell you, because I'm very proud of this. I started Instagram in January of this year,
Okay.
and I'm almost at 500 followers.
Nice.
So
Right.
I know in those 500 people, there's going to be people who think exactly what I think, but
Hmm.
there's going to be people who don't. And
Absolutely.
my goal is not to alienate anybody.
Yeah, no, and that's not what um, being a literary citizen is about, right? That's not we're really sharing our love of
Right.
reading and our love of words and storytelling. And I love that you have posts. I feel like it's called the five adjectives.
5 adjective review.
Yeah, that's
I
great
try to do it
way
every
of
week.
being a literary citizen, right? Telling others about other people's books, just a little lovely way of sharing with other people about somebody else's books. I think it's brilliant. I enjoy them. In fact, I get reading um, recommendations that way through you.
And I knew I couldn't keep up traditional reviews. I knew I just couldn't. I couldn't
Yeah,
just knew I couldn't. But I sat, I remember just sitting there. How can I give a nod to a book? And I thought, if somebody could just tell you 5 good things about it,
right.
and even 5 good things can be very lengthy, but I can come up with 5 adjectives about the
Yeah,
book, other than the genre and the audience for it. And that might be enough to make people at least go, huh, and look it up
absolutely.
online or in their bookstores. So
Yeah, you get a really good sense of the book just by those five well chosen words. And coming from a writer and a former librarian and former teacher, they
and I think
just
in the
saying.
new year, it's funny, I've had this ongoing struggle with myself. Um, because I wrote, this book is the Stones of Burren Bay is YA. The manuscript that I have completed is YA. And my next project, I was thinking, oh, maybe it'll be adult. And I just said, no, I'm spending all this effort, and I love young adult.
Yes.
I'm spending all this effort on developing the myself as a YA writer,
Yeah.
that's how I'm going to identify. And so,
Yeah.
starting in January, the books that I'm reviewing are going to be, I'm going to try
Yeah.
very hard to make them all
I
YA.
love that. I love
Yeah,
this. You have another project that you've been working on
I
about
do.
Florence Carlyle, and this whole concept blew me away when you told me about it at first. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. I've been studying Japanese form poetry, again with Vera Constantino, our friend and poet.
Yes.
And I've been studying it now, I guess it's almost 6 years. Before COVID, I started before COVID. We now everything we do is before and after COVID,
Right,
right?
exactly.
And so in 2023, during April, which is National Poetry Month, I thought, okay, I'm going to practice writing haiku and senryu, which are the two short forms of Japanese form poetry. And I'm going to use it ekphrastically. So I'm going to be inspired by artwork to do it. And I had discovered this painter named Florence Carlyle, who she was born in 1864 and she passed away in 1923. So she became quite renowned as a Canadian painter. Uh, the Art Gallery of Ontario has her work. Hamilton, London, even across Canada have the odd piece of her work. Largely, her work is owned by the Woodstock Art Gallery because that's where she lived. And so they ended up with a huge selection of her work. And that's where I first engaged with it. That's where I first saw her. I saw her self-portrait hanging in the gallery, and I thought, what is this? Because it was an otherwise remarkably modern show going on. So I was kind of wondering because she painted at that time. Anyway, so I accessed her work through the web page, the website of the art gallery, where you can look at pictures of their collection. And I thought I will write a poem a day ekphrastically with a work of Florence Carlyle. And within 7 days, I had like 40 poems, and I had sucked in Vera with me on this project and had her looking at the paintings and helping me edit. And so then I ended up with this body of work, this ekphrastic poetry of Florence Carlyle's work. And I thought, what can I do with this? So my daughter suggested submitting a proposal to the art gallery, which is what I did. And then, a year later, or not even a year later, that summer, the Ekphrasis of Florence opened at the art gallery, and it was from July to January the following year, actually January of this year. And I did a poetry reading. I did a poetry workshop. I'm doing the same poetry reading in Hamilton at the Art Gallery of Hamilton in April of 2025. And then the curator approached me again and said, because I had been going through Carlyle's archives just because I'm a nosy Nilly, and I thought that was quite interesting to do, and discovered that Carlyle actually had two pieces of her own writing that were published, truth. One in her lifetime and one posthumously. And so we decided to create a little chapbook. I have the chapbook beside me. This is the book.
It's so beautiful.
And it's called In the Space Between, The New Woman in the Writing of Florence Carlyle. So it opens with an essay by myself that places Carlyle's writing within that time of history when we were shifting from the concept of the true Victorian woman who was a mother and a homemaker and, didn't work outside her home, to the new woman, which was that woman who was, especially during the world wars, was working and was managing the home front, who got the vote. So she kind of grew up in that. She had a mother who was very forward thinking. She was an educator, and she made sure all of her daughters, and she had a few, were educated. And so in that time period, Florence wrote a piece for the Toronto Daily Mail about her experience as one of the first cohorts to study art in Paris. And then she wrote three novel-length manuscripts. Far as I can tell, only one full manuscript exists, which I've had the pleasure of reading. And then she had this short story that got published in, I can never remember if it's Time and Tide or Tide and Time, which was the first feminist magazine in the UK, because she lived out the last 15 years of her life or so in the UK, and it got published after she passed away. She was a queer painter.
Yeah.
She lived with her partner for the last 15 years or so. I would like to say openly, but perhaps not entirely openly. They were just really good friends, according to those people around them. But the people who loved them, I think, understood.
Sure.
And so that's what this became. It's my essay, her two full pieces of writing, some of her paintings and my poetry, as well as some of her letters that I was able to access in the archive that talk specifically to her writing. So like she she let her siblings know that she's written a book and it's with a, it's with this publisher and that publisher. And oh, she got trashed here and oh, but it's really good here. So, and unfortunately, she was a new female writer writing at a time historically where paper was short and they weren't, they were looking for war stories, not necessarily, idyllic stories of women living together in a pastoral sense.
Right.
And so she never got anything published until Mary's Child. And I won't tell you about Mary's child except to let you know that it's pretty forward and advanced for, I
Okay.
think, 1923. It was a shock when I read it.
Okay.
Well written. You can see her growth as a writer. So yeah, so that was a really neat project that we just finished. It was launched in October, and it's for sale at the Art Gallery of Woodstock. Um, and it's also at the National Library because I checked.
Okay.
It
Awesome.
has
Yeah.
an ISBN number. It's got everything. So, and it's in
Nice.
our local libraries collection. So that's kind of cool.
That's amazing. It's just been lovely to watch you on this journey and how things
Yeah.
just sort of evolved, and you've really brought her back into, to people's attention, which is,
Yes.
I think, phenomenal, like her writing and her artwork as well. So Emily, do you have any great young adults book recommendations for folks? Things that you've
Oh,
loved?
recently I've read, I love magical realism.
Me
So if I
too.
had to pick a YA writer who does beautiful YA, it would be Laura Ruby. And
Mm,
her most recent, she might have one other more recent, but one of my favorites of her, well, she wrote Bone Gap. I don't know if you're
okay.
familiar with that, but she also wrote uh, 13 Doorways, a Wolf Behind Each One, or something.
Ooh, what a
Let me
great
see.
title.
uh 13 Doorways and Wolves Behind Them.
Yes.
And it is historical fiction. It's also magical realism, as is Bone Gap. I also read recently a book by Kern Carter, who was at Woodstock
Woodstock
this
Literary
year.
Festival.
And then there was Us, which also has a little thread of magical realism through it.
Okay.
There's a little bit of that in that story. Um, I have read a few adult books, but I also read Danielle Daniels. I've been into books written in verse, and she has a
Yes.
middle grade novel called Reasons to Look at the Night Sky.
Yeah. Okay.
Also, Vicki Van Sickle, who I'm a huge fan of. She's got one called The Lightning Circle, which is YA.
Okay.
But my favorite book in verse is by Elizabeth Acevedo, called Poet X, which is just phenomenal as a
Okay.
book in verse.
Verse.
And a few others, those
Great.
ones
Oh,
that are
those are
coming
great
to my head.
recommendations. Yeah,
Yeah.
excellent recommendations. Well, Emily, thank you so much for stopping whatever you're doing today. What were you working on earlier? What was your day like? What should we take you away from?
Well, I get up every morning and I work with a group online called PJ Writers, Pajama
Yes.
Writers. And we write, it's through the Amherst Writers and Artists organization. And so I was up early this morning doing my hour of writing, and then I sort of float over into the next hour. And
Yes.
I'm
As it
working on my
does.
third project, and
Yeah.
it's both magical realism and historic fiction, and so historical fiction, and so it's requiring quite a lot of research to place everybody in the right time frame and to
Right.
feel like they're placed in that time period. So I've
Exactly.
been doing a lot of research. And then I had lunch and watched murder mysteries because that's next
Ooh.
guilty pleasure.
I feel like those kind of guilty pleasures are, research.
Yeah, true crime. True crime. Oh, and I'm also into it's that series it's on television, but I'm watching it on YouTube called Long Lost Family.
Oh,
And it profiles two people who were either adopted
yeah.
or they adopted out a child. And so it reconnects those people because that features into a little strain of the story I'm working on. So I've been watching.
Yeah. Ooh,
True
I'll look for
crime
that.
and long lost families.
Oh, sounds right up my alley. That sounds great. I am sure there lots of listeners will be like looking for those recommendations too. So thanks so much for having a break with us and chatting
Oh,
about all
very
things
happy.
YA. And it's been wonderful to have a little chat again. But I'm sure we will. Well, we usually do get together for coffee in person when you come through town. But where do we normally go? We go to
We've been to a few different places.
yes.
We've been to the new one at Chapters. What's that
Oh,
called?
is it called Good Earth?
Good Earth.
Good Earth is
We've done
lovely.
Twigs. We've done
Yes, another lovely
uh
place.
Salute.
Salute.
Now I've been quite a bit to Books and Beans. I just don't know if
Books and
you and I have been
Beans.
at Books and Beans.
No,
Been there with other
we'll have
people.
to do that next time. Yeah,
Okay.
lots of local coffee shops. And do you have a special coffee shop in your new location that you frequent?
I live in Woodstock and there's a few but my husband and I often if we go read, let's go
I
read get
love
coffee at a
that.
place called Early Bird. So Early
Oh,
Bird Cafe, which is quite nice. So
just love a
yep,
coffee shop for writing and reading and just, drinking coffee and tea.
exactly. Exactly.
Well, it's great to see you. And thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome. I had a
Okay.
grand time. Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks. Thanks for taking time out of your schedule to have a coffee break with us at Women Writing. Don't forget to subscribe to Women Writing on Substack. If you like this episode, share it with someone who needs a writing break and a little inspiration. Happy writing. Thank you to Michael Jensen for his original music and editing, and to Mia Jensen for the logo design.